Good morning, brothers. This is Corey Rigler, and I am, doing the first of a online web training. And what I'm going to be talking about today is what's called the Leadership Legacy Model. And the Leadership Legacy Model is the proprietary BLTW leadership model. And as a facilitator, it's something you should definitely know about. And it's definitely a goal to make sure that each one of your guys in your discussion groups knows about. So there's a lot to this, but at the end of the day, I'm hoping to make it pretty simple. And let me just kind of go back and start off with the genesis of this whole leadership legacy model. Basically took place maybe about 5 or 6 years ago. I think what we noticed on an organizational level was that guys were really fired up at BLTW, and then they kind of got home. They hit this brick wall of reality, and they met with a lot of resistance that they were unprepared for. And some made some changes they learned, and some tried new things. And in my case in particular, one of the things that I discovered, I was on the Quaestor faculty for probably a decade, and what I found was, I would do all these great things to get guys to eliminate hazing and create new pledge programs and change their I week, and really felt like I made a difference. And then a year or two later, I would have the McGeester for that exact same chapter come back, and I'll be like, oh my gosh, I had Joe a few years ago. We talked about all these changes. How's it going? And this new guy would say like, oh yeah, well, Joe did all these things on his own, and the guy after him basically said, if you elect me, I'll change it all back. And so that's really what we saw, was this incredible pendulum swing. So what I'm going to be doing during this call is not necessarily following the slides, because I don't want to insult your intelligence, but I think that really to understand the leadership legacy model, we do need to understand that currently, these officers are being kind of set up with this notion almost that, they're the one people who can, if they have a vision, then automatically they're leaders because they're officers already, and people will follow them because that's what people have to do. And I think really we learned that is not the case. So what we want to do is kind of turn that on its head and basically say that, first of all, there's elements to being a leader that may differ from your preconceived notions. But secondly, this is really more about how do we take these ideas home to get the buy-in. Okay. So, we've already kind of touched on this, but I think that really what we have here is we have a brother who just gets inspired, and he wants to do the right things, and, but unfortunately he only learns just a portion of the skill sets that he needs to be an effective leader. And I think it's always worthwhile to talk about what's the difference between an effective leader and an enduring leader. And I think anybody can be effective for a short time, but I think the greatest leaders that we have are people who have an enduring legacy, right? I mean, several people come to mind, JFK, Churchill, Gandhi, Jesus even. But, certainly there's other leaders like, without being political, we can say Barack Obama, certainly effective, some would argue during the 8 years of his office, but his successor is now kind of threatening to completely undo and unravel every single thing that he accomplished. So while he may have been effective in the short term, he may not be an enduring leader. And what we need, though, is we need guys to make an enduring change back in their chapters. And so really we need to break the cycle of that pendulum. Instead of having the, this kind of this monotonous series of up and downs, we need successive officers and successive generations of chapter leadership to continue to build on itself. And that's essentially what we're doing. And I think that, this is an important question to ask, and that is that, do we need another leadership model? There's things like, there's any number of models. There's enduring leadership, there's servant-based leadership, there's the one man in history leadership, there's transformational leadership. And the point is that all these are correct. And I would say in my 20-some years of being at BLTW, we have probably made a dozen different leadership books, the focus of our curriculum that year, whether it's Kouzes and Posner, the Leadership Challenge, whether it's Maxwell's 21 Laws of Leadership, you name it. But these are all correct, but at the same time, they're all wrong because we have an organization where we are having turnover on average twice a year. And so how can somebody really be effective and make that much of an impact in one semester or 2 semesters? And I think the answer is they can't, right? What we need to do is instead show our undergraduates and train our undergraduates that most of their accomplishments are actually going to be fulfilled long after they are gone. And I think of all the leadership models that comes closest to this, it's the model of servant-oriented leadership. Okay? But I think that in all the annals of all the analogies that really kind of get across what we're trying to talk about here today with the leadership legacy model, this is probably the closest. So in the late 14th century, 1379, New College was founded, and it's among the oldest of the Oxford colleges in England. And the center of life at New College, when it was first designed, was a place called Great Hall. And if you've ever watched the Harry Potter movies, Great Hall is really the inspiration for the hall where they have all their meals in the Harry Potter movies. And so at the top of this Great Hall are these unbelievably tall oak beams that really stretch, you know, the length and the width of these. And some of these beams are as massive as 2 square feet, and they span up to 45 feet long each. So as you imagine, they're holding a pretty impressive and unbelievable load. Well, a few hundred years later, some students were kind of climbing up, and they were trying to do this tradition of kind of, you know, whittling in their initials into the great beams, and kind of a massive chunk of it came down. And when they looked at it, they noticed that there was a lot of dilapidation and just deterioration. And so at one point, the university hired Sir Gilbert Scott, a very famous architect at the time, to take a look at them. And what he had done was, you know, he basically determined, hey, either if we don't find replacement beams, we're just going to have to tear this down. And so he was doing quite a bit of research into the original plans, and at one point he ran across this notation that said, you know, if you need replacement beams, go find the Royal Forester. And so he somehow found this college forester, and he asked the person, you know, here's my situation. Do you have any solutions for me? And the college forester told them, here, in this particular instance, go to Great Hall Woods. And Gilbert Scott was like, what's Great Hall Woods? And the college forester said, well, it's basically a forest of oak beams that were planted more than 500 years ago in the event that you would need replacement beams. So pretty cool story. You know, but I think as I reflect on that, that's really kind of the message, unfortunately, that I think we have to get across to some of these leaders, that what they're doing now, they may never see the results of directly. But what they're doing is they're doing something so pure and honest and enduring that it means that we need to undertake this. Okay, so in terms of this leadership legacy model, why is this important for a Quaestor? Well, you know, I would argue that, you know, to be a successful Quaestor, that you need both management skills as well as leadership skills. And I also think that, you know, being a Quaestor is really the best place to really hone both of these different skill sets that are so important for after graduation. But I think that really also this leadership legacy model, it really does speak to the importance of a legacy. And when we're looking at, you know, the health of a chapter, one of the most important aspects to a healthy chapter is a good financial legacy, right? I mean, are these chapters creating, you know, do they have a rainy day fund? Are they planning renovations or a capital campaign or something like that? What are they doing to make sure that future generations are not just going to thrive, but also that there will be a chapter house or there'll be a chapter period? You know, nobody wants to come home to homecoming to a chapter that, you know, that closed long ago, right? So as we move forward, so hopefully we can establish that, yes, we need to emphasize a legacy, and we need to emphasize that leadership in its most effective form is actually an enduring leadership. And so now the question arises, well, how do we get there? And again, if we go back and rely on stories, I think that the Space Shuttle Challenger gives us a really great example for how do we do this. And so in 1986, the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded. I remember I was in my sixth grade classroom watching it live. Ultimately, it was discovered that a faulty O-ring worth less than $5 caused this monumental and unbelievable tragedy. But shortly thereafter, NASA actually created a trial. And the intent was, we want to see how accidents are either preventable or if they're just the result of uncontrollable variables. So they created 2 simultaneous trials, and the format was this, okay? So they basically took a shuttle crew, and the crew had a commander, a pilot, an engineer, and a navigator. And for this first crew, they were going to take them through hundreds of hours of simulations. And in this case, they introduced a set of variables, and then they gave the crew 30 seconds to figure out what was going to happen, and then plot their best course of action. Why 30 seconds? Well, because that's how much time the crew on the Challenger had. And so what they did is, the only constraint on this first group, they told the shuttle commander, we need you to do things exactly the way you normally would. What that means is the commander is the one who makes all the calls, right? Even though the pilot is flying the ship, the commander is still the one who says, pilot, change your elevation, pilot, roll this way, pilot, go that way, okay? So they took that first group through hundreds of hours of simulations. Also created a second group. Same scenarios, same time frame, same constraints, same everything. The only difference was, this time they told the commander, before you make any decision, talk it over with your crew. Yeah. So what's staggering and what's really important, though, is that when we look at this, when we look at the survival rate of the first group, right, where the commander himself was making all the calls, they survived 1 in 4 times. The second group, though, where they all had to talk it over amongst themselves, they survived about 3 times as much, right? So close to a 75% survival rate. That is staggering, considering they were going through the exact same scenarios, they had the exact same time frame. But I think the question is why? And I think really what you see here in the summary is, first of all, when you're in a high-stress environment, the commander of that first group, all the onus was on him to come up with the best idea, right? But unfortunately, in that military hierarchy, which is another form of leadership, there was not a lot of participation and not a lot of opportunities to bounce around or build upon good ideas. So this is really the first thing that we need to admit to ourselves, and that is that leaders do not always have the best ideas, okay? Now, just because the commander in the second group was asking the navigator what he thought, or the engineer what she thought, or the pilot what he thought, it does not mean at the end of the day it was a democracy. You know, it was not a democratic vote. The commander still had to make the best choice, but fortunately, because he had involved others in the process, he now had more things to choose from, therefore making it easier to select the best option, okay? And really what we have here is a few things, and that is that, you know, involving others, it gives you better ideas to choose from, right? But then we're also going to show that by using something like this as part of the leadership legacy model, we're actually increasing the odds of enduring, sustained success, okay? So again, so we're going to kind of go back to leadership theories, and I think that really what we have here is this leadership legacy model we feel is the best leadership model for our undergraduate officers, okay? One of the reasons we feel it's the best is because, first of all, it absolutely incorporates and embraces everything that you've ever been taught about leadership. The only difference is that it gives us a better way to bring it home, and currently that is a hole in the BLTW curriculum. Okay. So this is the basic thought, okay? So an officer goes to BLTW or something else, they have an idea for something. traditionally, they would come home with an idea and say, here's what I'm going to do. Here's my idea. Now I need you guys' help. Let's do it. And the chapter will either follow him and embrace him or not, right? And if it's the latter case, it's going to be a long term for that person. Okay, the leadership legacy model actually looks at a different and better way to do it. Okay, so in this case, what happens is the officer has an idea. Then what we recommend is the officer actually goes on an individual basis to brothers and says, here's my idea for this. And then what that officer is going to do, he's going to basically ask every single brother 2 questions. Okay, he's going to ask, how would you improve on this? Or do you have something better? Okay, I need to stop and kind of emphasize this for a second, because one of the worst questions he can ask is, what do you think? Okay, that does not give us meaningful feedback. Instead, what we need to ask is, how would you improve on this? Or do you have something that's better? Okay, at that point, one of the goals is he's really trying to involve and engage as many different brothers as he possibly can. Okay, so once he, just like the space shuttle commander, once he then kind of has an entire array of good options to choose from, then he goes ahead and he selects the best one. At that point, he can then present it to the chapter. And when he does, he needs to make sure to be able to say something along the lines of, hey, here's what I'm going to do, or here's what we're going to do. And oh, by the way, this didn't come from me. This came from Tommy and Joe and Don. And I think these guys really deserve all the credit for it. Okay. Now, hopefully, if he's done this right, one of the people that he's then attributed to his idea will become his successor, will be the next person out of office. And one of the things that we know from past Grand Consul Keith Kroc is that people help to support what they create. Okay, so this new officer who's, this newly elected officer who's now succeeding the previous person, they now have a vested interest in making sure this thing carries on. Okay, and as we know, the half-life of any tradition is about 2 years. So hopefully what we're seeing here is some good, positive, long-term change. Okay, so again, the most important part of this whole process is, coming up with an idea and then asking, how would you improve upon this, or do you have something that's better instead? But wait, I lied. This is really the most important part, and that is giving person credit with the idea. Okay? And by doing that, one of the things that this leader is trying to do, this officer is trying to do, is really serve as a servant-oriented leader. And what that means is we want the other brothers in the house to basically say, like, oh, well, Riggs isn't doing this for his own credit or build his resume or make him feel good about himself. Riggs honestly cares about the chapter, and and more importantly, he cares about the members of the chapters, especially those who can't speak for themselves, or for one reason or another feel disenfranchised, or maybe they're just shy or quiet. But whereas traditionally those people might have been ignored in the chapter, what we're actually trying to do here is actually involve them, make them part of the process, win them over to our side. And the other incredible aspect about this is, we are getting buy-in on the idea even before we go to present it to the chapter, right? The old model basically assumed that, yes, we're going to present it to the chapter and then we get buy-in. This is the opposite. This is, we're going to get buy-in before we even present it. So this is an extremely effective way to handle leadership. Now, it takes a little bit longer, and so that might dissuade some members from doing it, but those who are truly convinced that what they're doing is the right thing, and those who really have a great leadership goal and vision, this is what they have to do. Okay? There's just no ifs, ands, or buts about it. This is the best way to bring it home. Okay. So how can a Quaestor use this? Well, definitely, use it part of the budgeting and forecasting process. But really, I think one of the things that, this is called the leadership legacy model for a reason, and that is that we want there to be a legacy. And one of the offices in the chapter that is probably the most underutilized in creating a legacy is that of Quaestor, especially when they're creating a financial legacy, But I think that also as a facilitator, what are you going to do during your chapter discussion group time? And I think this is probably one of the best ways to do it. make sure that you spend a good amount of time saying, guys, you've done a great job creating some goals. How are you going to bring it back home in your chapter? Because I got to tell you, what we've been doing has not been working. Okay, so that again really underscores the importance of the leadership legacy model. Okay, so what we're trying to do with all these things, we're trying to eliminate this horrific back and forth model that has not been working for so long. We're also trying to fill the hole in the existing curriculum of really every fraternity, leadership program that we have. But if we can do all these things and do these things well, it'll be a better BLTW for you, the facilitator, and a more rewarding BLTW, and most importantly, post-BLTW experience for our undergraduate brothers. So, guys, this is Riggs signing off. I hope this has been helpful, and looking forward to seeing you at BLTW.